Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is a very exciting day. I'm very honored as the acting dean of the law school to introduce the provost and to kick off this event today. I just want to highlight why it's so special here at St. Thomas to have this event, because we are the top Hispanic degree awarding institution in the United States. So Hispanic Heritage Month means a lot to us because we live it every day. And I just wanted to give everyone in the audience just a tad of the history of this honor. In 1968, President Lyndon Johnson designated Hispanic History Week. And then in 1988, President Ronald Reagan extended that to Hispanic History Month. And this month, from September 15th to October 15th, pays tribute to the generations of Hispanic Americans that have impacted and enriched the United States, our society, and our American culture. And then I also feel so fortunate to have as our friend and colleague and provost one of the most well-known Hispanic educators in the country, Provost Garcia. Provost Garcia was born in Cuba, and he was the first Cuban-American dean of a law school. He is known nationally and internationally as a scholar and an educator. And we are so fortunate to have him. Not only is he an academic, but he is so well known locally of being a former prosecutor and a former defender. I just passed the mic to our hero and star, Provost Garcia.
I only paid Dean Lawson $25 for that wonderful introduction. It is my privilege and honor to present to you our distinguished speaker. I can think of no one better to represent this week than Commissioner and former Mayor Xavier Suarez. I might also add, I was chatting with him. I had the privilege and honor when I was a prosecutor of working together with his lovely wife, Rita, and some of his very close friends in a law firm. Okay. So I'm just going to highlight a few of his many accomplishments and a little bit about his biography and about his special tie to this law school and the progenitor of this law school, San Tomás de Villanueva in Havana, Cuba. But he is a scholar as well. He's written extensively. He received his undergraduate degree at Villanova University and his law degree and his degree in government at Harvard. He was first elected mayor of the city of Miami in 1985 and was subsequently reelected twice. He had many distinguished accomplishments during that tenure, but he cites as his most important one the construction of 1,500 affordable houses. He labeled that one of the proudest achievements during his tenure. He was then elected as Miami-Dade Commissioner for the District 7 on May 24, 2011, and was reelected by a 44-point margin. That speaks to a lot. On August 30th, 2016. And during his current tenure as commissioner, he has continued to advocate for affordable housing as well as workforce development programs and funding for public transit. So his family, he's got a beautiful family. I mentioned his wife, Rita, and his father, Manuel Suarez Carreño, was the first dean of the School of Engineering at the Universidad Católica de San Tomás de Villanueva. That is our parent institution. The priest fled Cuba and established Biscayne College directly from Santo Tomas de Villanueva. I had the privilege and honor of serving under the founder of this school, who fled Cuba and founded this school, Biscayne College, in 1961, Father Ed McCarthy. But don't worry about it. I'm a young guy. I got here when I was 10. I am sorry to say that I cannot stay, but I will watch his address later, because I got booked to do a presentation by the Federalist Society just across at CPD. So I am sorry, Commissioner. I would have loved to have stayed, but duty calls and I'll have to leave. Needless to say, we're very appreciative that you've taken time from your very busy schedule to come here in this very important date. And by the way, the Commissioner has taught for us. He has taught state and local government law. He's also taught business law at Biscayne College. So he has deep roots to this university as well. So thank you very much, Commissioner. We are honored to have you in our presence.
Thank you, Dean and Provost and Dean, for the very nice introductions. You know, they were looking for someone charismatic, young, Hispanic, and my son was not available. So they offered the invitation to me. There's so many things I can say about my ties to St. Thomas of Villanueva, of St. Thomas of Villanova here. It is true that my dad was Dean of Engineering at Santo Tomas de Villanueva in Havana. So I've described that by saying, because we lived across the street, and it was like living across the street from Princeton and your dad is Albert Einstein, you know? And that was the way it felt growing up, you know, because everybody said, oh, you're Dr. Suarez's son. So in my background, there's a couple of stories as I came up and I came to the United States, and I want to tell you about those in a second. But I also want to say, because of the affordable housing that was mentioned, this morning we did a groundbreaking in the West Grove in the city of Miami. And Miami was founded in 1896, okay? 400 people were the incorporators. Fully 1/3 were of African descent. And most of them, many of them, moved to the West Grove. And so our task as a commissioner from that district, and my son as mayor, and previously when I was mayor, is to make sure that those people feel that they should stay there, okay? They're invited to stay, as opposed to flat-out gentrification, which is what happens in other situations if you don't invite people to stay. How do you invite people to stay? You improve everything about the Grove. And one of the things that we've done, it wasn't part of my speech, but one of the things that we've done is we've made sure that the schools, the after-school programs exist in those schools. The idea actually came to me, I kind of sensed that that was necessary, but it came to me from someone that we all know as Uncle Luke, Luther Campbell. And the idea is from 3 to 5 years old, from 3 to 5 p.m., kids should not be going home to sometimes no daddy and sometimes no mommy and maybe an auntie and a grandmother or somebody else that can't handle them. They should be in some academic activity. And so we initiated that at Francis Tucker when there was a shooting. I don't know if you remember, there was a shooting a few years ago. We called it Envelopes of Safety. And at Francis Tucker Elementary, the school board superintendent was kind enough to transfer to there a lady who also happens to be the vice mayor of Homestead, Patricia Faircloth. And she gets up, by the way, at 4:45 in the morning. She gets to school at 5:45 all the way from Homestead. And that school went this year because, in great part because of our programs there, from B to A in 1 year. So that's what you do. You make the community feel that they want to stay there. They want their kids to be educated there, across the street from where they live, not have to be taken to some other parts or maybe trying to get into a charter school or a private school. And I have nothing against charter schools or private schools. I myself was educated in private schools. I do want to say that I have with me 4 members of my staff. David Leite Vidal, whose mom, by the way, is the principal at Sunset Elementary, where my wife teaches. Roger Poe, who is finishing his law studies at FIU, Gavin Sitkoff, who just took the LSATs. I won't tell you how well he did, but it looks like maybe he can get into St. Thomas. We'll see. And Ella Pestano, also from my staff. So when I get to the United States, right, my dad was Dean of Engineering at Villanueva in Havana, and he had gone to school at Villanova in Philadelphia. And so he takes me and he finds what's the best school in Washington, D.C. And I tell him, well, one of the best schools is a Benedictine school called St. Anselm. So he takes me there and he says to the headmaster, it's the old English system, you know, headmaster, first form was the 7th grade. And he says, you know, I'm Dr. Suarez. I was the Dean of Engineering at Villanueva in Cuba. And I went to school at Villanova in Philadelphia. I'm a civil engineer. I'm this and that. And the principal headmaster says, well, Dr. Suarez, that's all very well and good. You know Cuban fathers, right? Here in the United States, we accept the students on the basis of their merits, not their fathers. So he said, we got to give them a test. Usual, verbal, and math. And the principal headmaster brings it back, Father Hugh brings it back and says, Dr. Suarez, your son did very well in math, which is a good thing because he didn't do very well in the English part. And one of the questions, this gives you an idea how far I had to go in this country, okay? One of the questions was, I'll never forget it, of the following 4 words, which one does not fit in with the other 3? The same category as the other 3. And the words were stream, river, creek, and mustard. And I had it wrong. Put a big red circle around it. And he said, your son's in trouble. So they gave me I had a pocket dictionary, and they assigned another student to help me out with, you know, particularly with subjects that, you know, that you needed to have the English language. And so I learned the English language on diagrams on the blackboards. And so, you know, I get to Miami many years later. I want to tell you a little bit about how difficult it was to get elected to anything. And when I finally became mayor of Miami, my colleagues on the board, on the commission, or professors, eminent professors, sometimes the bigger they are, the harder they fall. They always say, and lawyers always say, between you and I just say, I'm just a refugee, but it's supposed to be between you and me. It's a prepositional phrase, you know. I mean, I feel badly, and I tell them, well, unless something's wrong with your fingers, you're supposed to say I feel bad, you know. It's nominative. You know? So, but another one I love is irregardless. You know, I always say to my colleagues on the committee, the word doesn't really exist, but that's okay, you know. I'm just a refugee, you know. So if your last name ends in EZ, really try to get it right, okay? Because they're looking for you to make that mistake, okay? A lot of those mistakes that they're looking for you to make. So stereotypes, you have to live with stereotypes. So when I get to St. Anselm's, the coach comes to me. The school was so small that we only had 2 teams, basketball and baseball. So the coach says to me, Coach Dwyer, who had been coach of the best high school team in the history of the United States at Archbishop Carroll, with John Thompson and all those folks, says to me, Suarez, you're Cuban, right? And I go, yes, Coach. He says, I need you to play baseball. I said, Coach, I play basketball. He says, Suarez, are you Cuban or you're not Cuban? I go, yes. He said, grab that mitt and that bat and go play baseball. Don't give me a hard time. So, you know, but I ended up playing baseball. The kids at my high school were not very good in any kind of sport, but they were very intellectual. So I thought back to my dad when he came to the United States, and he went to Villanova in Philadelphia, hoping to play sports. He ended up playing tennis. He wanted to play basketball, but that wasn't going to happen. Same problem as I had at Villanova, but that's another story. It's in one of my books. So he gets to Villanova in 1928, and they go, Suarez, you're Cuban, right? He goes, yes. He says, we need you to take care of the Wildcat. He says, the Wildcat, what are you talking about? He says, we have a live Wildcat. It's Villanova Wildcats, you know, and you're from Cuba, right? Can't you take care of a Wildcat? He says, I've never seen a Wildcat in my life, you know. He says, well, you know, it's like, did you guys live in trees in Cuba, you know, taking care of Wildcats for a living, you know? So he said, well, what does it entail? And he said, well, you get to travel. The Wildcat, by the way, has been tamed. I don't know if they did something to it, the teeth or something, and it's not going to bite you or anything, and then you can hold it from a fairly easy rope or whatever, and you get to travel with the team, and he says, okay, I'll take care of the Wildcat. So you have to adjust a little bit and not mind the stereotypes too much. Then, very important lesson. And this country is the only country, not only in the world, but in the history of the world, that would give you the opportunity as a foreigner, as a refugee, within 25 years, not only to become a citizen, but to run for office, high office, in a city like Miami. And so I ran in 1979 for the city commission, and I lost. I ran in 1981 for the city commission, and I lost. I ran in 1983 for commission, then I switched to mayor at the last moment when the main challenger of Mayor Ferre pulled out, and I lost that one. And my son Francis, who knows how competitive I am in sports, academics, anything, said, he was like 8 years old, he says, Daddy, how come you always lose? So the moral of that story is just keep at it, persevere. I'm not a classic politician, okay? I'm not an extrovert. Winston Churchill is my hero in so many ways, and he's what they call an intuitive extrovert, someone who really loves, I love my books, I love my reading, I love my legal writing. I did publish a law review article as a student. It was kind of interesting when I went to the, it wasn't in the Harvard Law Review, okay? It was Villanova, my undergrad, but I did take it to the Harvard Law Review, and they told me, you're bringing an article? Your own article? Or bringing somebody else's? They thought I was a messenger for some well-known jurist or something. So you can sign that little book there and leave it there, the text. It was kind of interesting. I don't think they had too many law students that were submitting. By the way, it's on congressional immunities, and it's, well, I got a lot of help with the footnotes and with the cites from my buddies at Villanova. But I went to law school at Harvard. I was the first person in my family to be a lawyer. Okay, we were all into math and engineering and technical stuff, and so after a week at Harvard Law School, and I would see the ivy on the walls and stuff, and I go, oh, that's why they call it the Ivy League, and I was awed by the place. I mean, I had gone to Villanova. I had gone to Villanova to play basketball. I never made the team, and the story on that is in one of my books. You can read about it. So, here I was at Harvard Law School. And maybe because I didn't play basketball, I got to study a little harder at Villanova and get into Harvard. But I was sitting there, and I was reading the cases, I didn't know they were horn books. I shouldn't say that, should I? And, the case books were written by the professors that taught us, Kastner in real estate, Professor Miller in civil procedure, all these guys. And it just wasn't going in, I'm telling you. As an engineer, I was used to seeing, the equations at the beginning of the chapter and explaining, to you the principles that led to those equations, already worked out by the great geniuses that figured out all those things. And then the applications of that were at the end, and you get asked the questions, but I mean, they isolate the variable for you. They help you. Here I'm reading a 30-page case, trying to find out what the holding is, and I go, well, I just can't do this. I cannot do this. My mind is not right for this stuff. It doesn't go in. And then I said, that's after 1 week, by the way. Then I said, well, wait a minute. I'm going to finish a year. I'm not going back home and telling, my friends and my dad and my sisters and my brothers, of whom I have many, by the way, I'm the 9th of 14, that I couldn't make it at Harvard Law School. I'm not telling them that. I'll do 1 year, and I'm going to do well. I'm going to get good grades, and then I'll quit, because this doesn't make any sense to me, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it, and you know what? I never thought about it again. After that decision, I made a mental decision, a psychological decision. I am going to do law. It makes absolutely no sense to me. We come from civil code countries. We come from countries where there's a constitution and codes that interpret that, first principles philosophically, and then statutes that interpret those and that legislate for people, and then, yeah, you're going to have different applications of the statute, but you don't learn it from just any old case. Case law made no sense to me. After that week, I never thought about it again. It was the road less traveled for me. I chose the road less traveled, as per the poem by Robert Frost. By the way, Robert Frost was John Kennedy's favorite poet. And I think of Robert Frost a lot. I wasn't going to say this today, but towards the end of the day, like today, I'm going to be very tired, okay? I started the day in a debate in Spanish. You know how it is when you go from English to Spanish, you have to fix your mouth, you know? And on the MDX, on this agency that taxes us to use roadways that were built 30 years ago with taxes that we already paid for, and it's hitting the working class in the worst possible way. And then I end the day in a second reading of the budget, and that has to be done by state law after 5:01. So after 5:01 p.m., we begin to take testimony from people, and then our commissioners begin to discuss what's going on, and we ultimately vote, sometimes well into the night. I'm hoping that won't be the case. So I do want to say, oh, by the way, on that 44-point victory, 72-28, that is correct. That was 44 points. I didn't spend the money in the campaign. I didn't spend my campaign funding because the guy that I was running against wasn't known by anybody, didn't have any money. We actually became friends during the campaign. He said he liked all my ideas. So I said, well, why are you running against me? So I used the money for the after-school programs. And that's how we funded the first 4 after-school programs, including the one at Francis Tucker. There was no after-school program at Francis Tucker when we took it over. Ella and Roger and all these guys helped me. Now they have 150 students at Francis Tucker in the middle of the West Grove in martial arts, in STEM, or STEAM nowadays, I guess, and dance. And that school, those kids do 87% better in performance and 90-some% in attendance. You don't miss school when you have an after-school program that you enjoy. You just don't miss school, and that's really important. So, but I think I'm only going to get paid if I talk about Hispanic heritage, right? So I want to tell you something about the law and the heritage of Hispanics, in particular those of us that have heritage in Spain. International law did not exist until the School of Salamanca got involved in it. I'm going to read you an excerpt. One of the great philosophers was actually a Jesuit priest, and his name was Francisco Suarez. Some other ones were Francisco de Vitoria, etc. You know what they say about Francisco Suarez? Do we have any great theologians here or philosophers? He was a Jesuit, and Thomas Aquinas, of course, was a Dominican. Thomas Aquinas became, one of the great philosophers and a saint. And they said that if Francisco fuera santo, Tomás no lo fuera tanto. If they had canonized Francisco Suarez, they wouldn't have probably canonized Thomas Aquinas. By the way, Thomas Aquinas is, to me, one of the 3 great philosophers of all history. St. Augustine being another one, and Aristotle. Those are my A-team, as I call them in my recent book, which you don't even have to buy. If you send me an email, I'll send you the galley sheets for free. My email, by the way, is my name, Xavier Suarez, ESQ, because I practice law at AOL. That's it. You're hooked up with good stuff, hopefully. Here's what they said about the School of Salamanca, because what happened is Bartolomé de las Casas was the great preacher to the American Indians, and particularly the ones in Cuba. By the way, he was Jewish, converted, and he and the rest of these prelates fought for the natives. And I'm going to read, it's a little bit long, the excerpt, but the juridical doctrine of the School of Salamanca represented the end of medieval concepts of law, with a revindication of liberty not habitual in Europe at that time. The natural rights of man came to be, in one form or another, the center of attention, including rights as a corporeal being, right to life, economic rights such as the right to own property, and spiritual rights, the right to freedom of thought and to human dignity. You cannot imagine how tough it was for European civilization to admit that folks that seemed to be totally uncivilized and barbarians to them had absolute rights like any other human being, infinite value. The School of Salamanca reformulated the concept of natural law, law originating in nature itself, with all that exists in a natural order sharing in this law. Their conclusion was, given that all humans share the same nature, they also share the same rights to life and liberty. Such views constituted a novelty in European thought and went counter to those then predominant in Spain and Europe, that people indigenous to the Americas had no such rights. And the same is true of Africa and other, in Asia and other places where they thought that the people were not sufficiently civilized to have fundamental human rights. So that's a great tradition. Another one that happens to sort of hit my family a little bit, guess what? The first public school in Europe was in Spain. We just dedicated a street to the person who founded it. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the order Escolapios. Escuelas Pías. They were founded by Saint Jose de Calasanz, 1590 something. We dedicated a street out to the saint. His second last name was Gaston, and I am a Gaston by my mother's side. So San Jose de Calasanz said, I want to teach poor kids that cannot afford. The only people that got taught in Europe or any part of the world were nobility or very wealthy people, which is pretty much the same thing. I mean, nobility, you were wealthy, and everybody else was not so wealthy. And then he insisted, by the way, this is 100 years after the Jews were expelled from Spain. He insisted on teaching Jewish kids, so I'm very proud of my ancestor. Then go forward a little bit, and now it's a little bit more subtle, but it's the philosophical basis of what this country was based on. And initially, it was negative rights. The right to have the government not take away from you your liberty, your property, all the things you read in the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights. But FDR, towards the end of the war, sensed that after fighting Nazism, absolute totalitarianism and racism and everything else that Nazism implied, that we were going to have to battle a little bit another ideology that talked about providing, positive human rights to everybody, a decent standard of living. But where do you find philosophical basis for that? FDR had not read the encyclicals that came from this tradition that founded St. Thomas, okay? And so I didn't know about this when he proclaimed the 4 great freedoms. Does everybody know the 4 great freedoms? Okay, Norman Rockwell has depicted them. And 3 of them were negative rights. Freedom from having anyone impede your worship, freedom from bodily harm, and freedom of association. In other words, the right to do things without government interference. But he had an assistant, and I didn't know about this until I read a book by Jonathan Alter called The Defining Moment about the New Deal. And Jonathan Alter describes a scene in which FDR was a young man, and we think that FDR was brilliant, and great writer and well-read. I guess we confuse him with Teddy Roosevelt, who really was brilliant. But anyhow, Walsh comes to him, who was later his Secretary of State, and said, Franklin, you don't know anything about anything. Why don't you read this? And he gave him one of the great encyclicals, the first social encyclicals from the 1890s, Rerum Novarum, which means on the condition of the working classes. And he built that in to the 4 great freedoms through, guess whom? The first woman on the cabinet of the United States, Frances Perkins. I love that name, Frances. But Frances with an E. And Frances came to him and said, you should put a positive human right. But how do you phrase it? Everything is freedom from, it's negative human rights, freedom from not having somebody take away your freedom. How do you do a positive human right? And it doesn't fit into our philosophical concept, doesn't fit into our jurisprudence. We have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but no guarantee that anybody's going to help you if you don't get there, or if you fall through the cracks, or if you're born with some kind of impediment, or if you overdo it, on drugs and you become addicted, whatever. So you know what he called it? Does anybody know? The fourth freedom, the only positive one? A double negative. Freedom from want. And from that moment forward, in American jurisprudence, at least in the global sense, we began to understand a concept that actually comes from Thomas Aquinas, distributive justice. Commutative justice is you sign a contract or you sign a deal, you work for an employer, and they have to pay you a certain amount. Distributive justice means that we're all participants in all of the goods of the earth. And we have to share in some equal way because everybody has a right to what we now call a decent standard of living. In American law, that concept that you can undo a contract to make it fair didn't come into vogue. I think it was Judge Bazelon in 1956 in the famous case that defined unconscionability of a contract. So read up on that one because that's the beginning of the understanding of distributive justice, which we now call commonly social justice. So, the UN Charter on Human Rights was founded, was established, or was written and signed in 1948. I always like to say there's three great things that happened in 1948. The UN Charter on Human Rights, the State of Israel, and my parents conceived me. Because I was born in 1949. Later on, I read an article that ultimately was published in the Harvard Human Rights Review by former U.S. Ambassador to the Vatican, Mary Ann Glendon, who is a Harvard law professor now, was and is again. And it's the crucible of human rights, the Latin American influence. The two relators, the two principal drafters of the initial draft of the human rights, the United Nations Charter on Human Rights were Cuba and Haiti. Emile Sanlot and Guy Pérez Cisneros. My wife's cousin happens to be married to the son of Guy Pérez Cisneros, who was like 31 to 32 years old. He was a pain in the ass, can I say that? At these meetings where they founded the Human Rights Charter, which was finally made into law in 1948. Spanish is at the root of everything that we do. As I was coming here, my older brother said, because a lot of people don't even know, why do we call Latins, if you ask the average person in the street, why do you call a Latino a Latin? What do you mean a Latin American? Latin, why? And it's because Latin is the basis of our language, as it is the other Romance languages. I think there's 6 of them altogether. But my brother was telling me on the way over here, he's older than I am, that the English language is, I think he said 65% of the words also come from Latin. So you gotta remember that tradition is very important. Oh, I did want to say 1 or 2 funny anecdotes because I'm also a big believer in science, okay? And I know as you practice law, science comes into play a lot, okay? I had a case one time which involved Medicare overuse or unnecessary use of Medicare. And there were 100 files that my client had been told by the investigators of the agency that handles all the Medicare and Medicaid payments, it's called CMS, there was 100 files of which 42 had some close to fraud or overuse of medical services, et cetera. And I said, okay, there's 100 files, can I look at them? So they sent them to me from Washington, D.C. after I got my retainer. Make sure you get your retainer. So I looked at the first 10, the ones that were numbered 1 to 100. I looked at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. 41 out of the 100 showed unnecessary, maybe even excessive billing, so they were trying to get a couple of $1 million out of my client. So I looked at the first 10, and the first 10 were fine. So I called a lawyer, because I like math a lot, and I like baseball a lot, and I called the lawyer in Washington. I said, you know what the chances are that the first 10 were randomly selected and that the same methodology was used for the next 90, and out of the next 90, you got 41 bad ones, and the first 10, you got 0, okay? If there's a 41% chance of, you having excessive use, if that's the pattern, in the first 10 not having one that was bad, it would be like a baseball player. I said, do you understand baseball? Maybe the federal investigators understand baseball. A guy that hits 410, I think Ted Williams was the last guy that hit over 400. And I don't think he hit 410, I think he hit 407. But if you take 0.4 to the 10th power, and I cranked it out for him what it was, and I said it won't happen. So we settled the case very quickly with a little bit of math and a little bit of science. But one of the issues that comes up a lot is sea level rise. Now, my staff is going to wonder if I'm going to, say something negative about my colleagues on the county commission, and the answer is no. This person is no longer on the county commission. So, but we're talking about sea level rise. I'm a scientist, I'm an engineer first. I forced myself to be a lawyer. I forced myself to intermingle and get to know people. Not at all like my son. My son walks into a place like this, he's not nervous at all. I'm nervous as hell, even though I've taught in this school at different levels. Oh, I forgot to tell a story of when I taught quantitative approaches to management to the business students, and I made the mistake of telling them that for the final exam, I won't be around, and my wife is going to proctor the final exam. And I should never have told them that, because they didn't study a lick, and they came in, and my wife told me afterwards, they were all talking to one another. Are they supposed to do that? And I go, no. Anyhow, the grades were a little higher than they should have been. But we're talking about sea level rise in the middle of a commission meeting, and there were a lot of students in the audience from some school. So I said, Mr. Chair, I don't talk that much on the commission. I won't say why, but I don't. And then I said, sea level rise is a function of 3 basic factors. The thermal expansion of the water, okay? Water that's hotter occupies more space. The melting of ice caps. The media loves to talk about the melting of the ice caps. It's probably a secondary factor. And there may be even some changes now because Antarctica apparently is accumulating snow. When it's a little hotter, there's more snow in the atmosphere because it can absorb more humidity. And the third factor is the movement of tectonic plates under the ocean that changes the volume, the capacity of the ocean. So by this time, one of my other commissioners is going, oh, Harvard, we don't want to hear this. So I stopped. I said, that's the basic 3. Actually, we have a problem in Miami. We don't know why we had so much more sea level rise the first 15 years of this century. We think, thank God for Mayor Stoddard in South Miami, we think it may be that the Gulf Stream is slowing down as it gets to the North Pole, to the northern climates. And as you know from Bernoulli's law, right, any fluid, okay, that slows down rises, okay? The same amount of flow, you have to rise a little bit to maintain that stream. So that's Bernoulli's law. You all know about it. It's what makes planes fly. If this was a course in philosophy, I would tell you something interesting about Bernoulli's law. Bernoulli's law is what makes an airplane fly, right? You've got the top part of the wing, okay? It's longer than the bottom part. The molecules of air hit here, and they want to get together with the molecules that go underneath, the ones on the top. So the ones on the top, because it's longer, have to go faster. And Bernoulli's law says the sum of the pressure head plus the velocity head is equal to a constant. So you have lower pressure at the top in the wing. But you know what? Why do the molecules want to meet on the other side? Not only do we not know, we will never know. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. So as I was doing my this is a true story. This isn't one of my books. I'm not going to put names because I don't want anybody to feel offended. But the commissioner that was sitting next to me at the time, he's no longer in the county commission, leans over and goes, so how bad is it, sea level rise? I said, well, I'm trying to figure out a way to explain to this guy who's not into science and certainly not into the metric system. I said, for the last 100 years, there's been a pretty steady increase of 3 millimeters per year. So he sits right next to me, so he looks at me and he goes, how much is that? Well, assume 100 years. I'm looking for a nice round number, you know. Assume 100 years, that's 300 millimeters. How much is that? So I go, well, that's a third of a meter. I figure everybody knows what a third of a meter is. It's about the same as a third of a yard. So I go, a third of a meter is about a foot. So he thinks about it. He says, I got to move. Anyhow, that's in my book. I don't want to take up too much time. I don't know if there's supposed to be questions and answers. Yes. But I do want to leave you, since I hope that you all look me up on Twitter. Last night, I published, or I tweeted from the Acts of Fructuosos. This was the beginning of the Christian era where, and this has to do with the law, okay? This was the speediest trial in the history of trials, okay? A bishop was being questioned by a Roman judge as to whether he really wanted to stick with his Christian beliefs. And so he asked him, Episcopus es? Are you a bishop? And he said, sum. And I am. And he said, fuisti, you were. Knocked his head off. Speediest trial in history. Not that I want you to necessarily do speedy trials like that. My own father and my sisters were jailed in Cuba. My dad was taken in with Father, it was actually not Father McCarthy, it was actually Father Kelly, who was here at St. Thomas and died a few years ago. And they were both taken together to the G2 in question, and my dad was in jail, and I got to see him actually as an 11-year-old. I went to the fortress, La Cabaña fortress. No final advice except learn as much as you can. Make sure you do your legal writing. It takes a lot of effort, okay? And actually, it's like 3 of you, right, that are in legal writing. Believe me, just like talking does not come as natural to me as you might think, writing is even tougher. It makes all the difference in the world. Try to tell a story, too. Judges, they want to read something fun to read, you know. And people, write very dry. A lot of my briefs have some, and my trials, I also bring in a lot of historic, anecdotes and narratives and stuff to illustrate a point. You got to be a little careful. Some judges say you can't really use the Bible too much, but I do. And they pretty much get away with it. So no final words except that I'm so glad that I am myself an alumnus on the teaching side of St. Thomas. I think it's one of the best law schools in the world. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Welcome to St. Thomas again, over and over again on behalf of all of us. My question relates to your passion in the initial beginning of your career with the advocacy of affordable housing. I guess not so much today. Today seems like a lot of people are challenged by access to legal services. And as a law student here for 2 years and listening to various professionals, often we have heard about tragic stories on how the circuit court system here in Miami-Dade County works. I was wondering, as you veer forward in your quest to advocate on behalf of those that are less fortunate, do you have any ideas on how the court system here in Miami-Dade County could be reformed?
Yes. In many ways, the procedures that are used for small claims, summary procedure, should be extended much higher than $5,000. The fees should be much lower. Everyone should be encouraged at some point or another, I hate to say it, but everyone should be encouraged to file at least one lawsuit on their own, pro se. I help people a lot The fee is moderate, if up to $5,000. But I also wanted to mention, I was on the early part of my career, I was on the board of legal services of Greater Miami. And lo and behold, a president who was friendly to my cause appointed me to the National Legal Services Board, and there followed an investigation of my background that was like incredible. I would get calls from they would say it's the White House Office of Personnel. The transition director was a guy named Chase Untermeyer, and he was not a really fun guy to deal with. But anyhow, and they would ask me to fill out forms and stuff like this. So at one point they said, here's the form we need you to fill out. You haven't completed the form. I said, the form asks me for the names, addresses, current employment of all my brothers and sisters. Well, I have 14 of them. I don't even know where half of them live. So anyhow, I was on the Legal Services Board. I was proud to be there. The president wanted me to vote for a particular executive director. I did not. I thought that executive director was not the ideal one. And so soon after that, I became unelected to the Legal Services Board nationally. But I also think that and here I'm traipsing on very, I have to be careful on this because I know we got a lot of law school professors. The law has gotten way too complicated for people. We have now local rules. I don't know what gave judges the idea that on top of the federal and state rules, which take a while. I mean, I took that course with Arthur Miller, and it was not easy. Civil procedure. I did get an A. But anyhow, and then on top of that, we have local rules, and then each judge has their own specific rules on hearings and stuff like that. And so it becomes prohibitive to litigate. It works real well, by the way. If you're a corporate lawyer, it works really well between major corporations because they know how to use the expenditure to get the other side to settle. So 90-some% of all the cases, are settled. I forget what the number is in federal versus state court. I'm very good at settling because I always tell my clients, what's the wording in Spanish? What's the saying? Un mal arreglo es mejor que un buen pleito. A bad settlement is always better than a good lawsuit. And frankly, the hours that we have, now we have a battle over the courthouse. And I tell everybody, why does everybody want to build another huge courthouse downtown? Oh, because that's where the other one is, that's where the lawyers are. Yeah, but that's not where the people are. So at least the county court, $15,000 and less, should be in the neighborhoods. People cannot afford to park downtown. And of course, if you're a lawyer, or in my case, a county commissioner, I already have parking downtown, so I don't mind going to 73 West Flagler. You got to make the courts more affordable, reduce fees, and let me tell you, a lot of systems, including Germany and I think others, if you bring in a complaint and it's got merit, the judge takes a look at it. If you do it pro se, and if the case has merit, they assign a lawyer to you. By the state, kind of like we do in defense cases and criminal cases where a person could end up in a penal situation, end up in jail. And then you have a right to counsel in the famous case of, I think Abe Fortas was the one that brought that to the Supreme Court. Gideon's Trumpet is the book to read. A great story on Abe Fortas. He was in the Supreme Court and he became one of the super lawyers. And client sends him, asks him to check out the possibility that this law will be passed by the Congress and that it will, really hurt that industry. So Fortas writes back, because he checked out that the legislation wasn't going to pass. He says, you need to do nothing. You need to do nothing. $25,000. And so the client writes back and goes, you've been a great lawyer for me, and you're probably right, but $25,000 for one sentence? Why would I pay that? He wrote back, because it's right, $5,000 more. Yeah, it's overly complex. It's not accessible physically. The fees are too high. Now I found out that recently, when you file a counterclaim, if somebody sues you, you know, and it's unfair. And you file a counterclaim, now you got to pay for the counterclaim? What, $395 or something? So a lot of reforms. On affordable housing, the 5 criteria that I would like to implement are not easy, okay? Number 1, it should be land that is made available, property that is made available as close to free as possible. We did that in the city of Miami. We had $25 million that had been approved 10 years before I was elected mayor. They hadn't built one unit. I said, no, we got to put this money out there. We gave it with 1% interest for 10 years, basically free money for 10 years. And we built a whole bunch of units because the land was essentially free. And the cost of acquisition of property is a big part of why housing is not affordable. Number 2, and my son did this in the city of Miami, if you're close to a transit development or close to the workplace, like if you live in Overtown, East Little Havana, Wynwood, you're close enough you can walk to downtown. No parking requirement, okay? That cuts another 15 or 20% off. I like to use nonprofits. I like to use nonprofit CBOs because a lot of times you have faith-based institutions, frankly, and in places like Overtown and Coconut Grove and Liberty City, those are the entities that the people really work well with. I'd like to have no cost of insurance. Here's what's happening with insurance. Maybe St. Thomas can take a project along these lines. You know what's happening with insurance? Since 1992, we haven't had a major hurricane. We've had some problems with Irma, but no major hurricane. So in Brickell and in anywhere else where you have condominiums, okay, you pay $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, you know, sometimes $500,000 or $1 million if it's a big condominium, to an insurance company. The deductibles keep going up because they're a percentage of the value of the property. The properties in Brickell have gone up a lot. That's where I live. So we're sending a couple $100,000, and the deductible from a hurricane, like a 1 in 100-year hurricane, like Andrew, we never reach the deductible. So we never get any money. And of course, we now make sure that the units have, all the units have shutters. And if you don't have your shutter closed, all of the condominiums have been smart enough to say, we'll break into your unit if you're not there, and we'll make sure you're because once the wind gets in, that's another scientific issue, then it really does havoc. So government should do the catastrophic part of insurance for affordable housing. If government is going to subsidize the housing in the first place, why are we going to pay some insurance company that's never going to pay on the premiums because the deductible keeps going up, because the value of the property keeps going up, and because the damage is never all that great? And if it's catastrophic, you know what happens? The insurance companies go bankrupt, and we have to bail them out. By the way, that is the worst debacle, the worst travesty in American economic and governmental history. We bailed out an insurance company that is supposed to insure the investors? Are you kidding me? That's the whole point of investing, is you lose or you win. AIG, and I forgot how many. I couldn't figure out what AIG was because I didn't know that you had insurance for investments. How can you insure investments? The whole point of investments is you're taking a risk. Anyhow, free insurance for affordable housing, free property, nonprofit CBOs, typically community-based organizations, no parking, and try to do as much low-rise as possible simply because there's a really weird factor for any economist. The higher you go, the more per unit. It should be the other way around by economies of scale, but because we kick in all kinds of governmental requirements. So we think that, and we're getting ready to do this in Coconut Grove, by coming up with government land, by insuring the property, no parking, we can build housing for $75,000. And and here, you know, I know you're going to be told the opposite. The homestead exemption. Government is going to be, they were just telling us this week in Governmental Operations Committee, this is going to hit us, it's going to cost us $53 million if they pass this. I go, of course they have to pass it. People, the homestead exemption was passed in 1979 at $25,000. You know why $25,000? That was the average cost of a house in the state of Florida. So we are taxing the people least able to pay it, you know, and so I said to the county bureaucrats, okay, so if we pass the $75,000 homestead exemption, How much is that going to cost us? $53 million. I said, $53 million is 1% of our general operating budget. Are you serious? I also said, by the way, 1% for affordable housing. And so an organization called People Acting for Community Together, PACT, forced the county commissioners to support my motion to do $50 million in each budget from general revenues for affordable housing. The mayor and the administration watered that down to $10 million at mid-year if we had the funds. You know how much we ended up getting? $350,000. You could build 3 units for that. So the political will is not there to take money from where we should be taking it, from general revenues, from any source that we can get. The federal government and state governments help a lot. So we're building we're getting close to 1,000 units per year. But we should be doing 10,000 per year. The need, my son told me the other day, Dad, there's 100,000 people that need affordable housing in Dade County.
It is our great honor to thank you for being here for our Hispanic Heritage Month and all your service to the community. We have a goodie bag the Dean and Career Development and the Dean and Alumni Relations has put that together for you. And also we have a plaque in your honor to commemorate this event in honor of National Hispanic Heritage Month. Thank you so much.